Hello and welcome to episode 102 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amalith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. Before we get started, you're going to FOSSE this year, Amalith.
Yes, in Portland, Oregon, at the beginning of August. I don't remember the exact dates, but you can look at fossy.org, F-O-S-S-Y. I will be at the JMP booth most of the weekend and might be giving a talk in the XMPP track.
Right, well, I'll put a link in the show notes. So today we're going to talk about agile. Now, that is something of a nebulous term to me. I've heard a lot of different definitions of it. So let's start with, what does agile mean to you?
So agile, I think by the definition of it, is breaking a project down into small little chunks or phases and then just moving forward and trying to execute them right away without doing a fully detailed design, fully figuring out the entire spec, and having everything planned before you actually start writing the code. The idea of agile is you just go forward and start doing, and then you'll kind of figure it out as long as you go. It emphasizes working code and always having something that you can run and execute versus spending all of your time up front planning.
Yeah, so I think it was like originally conceived because it was in contrast to something that people used to call waterfall, which is like I guess only agile people called it waterfall, right? But basically you figure out absolutely everything up front as if you were building an engineering project, like a bridge or a building or something. You do all the calculations up front, you know exactly what's going to happen, and then you implement it. And it turns out that that's a terrible way to build software. And I think kind of one of the things about agile that people don't say is that absolutely no one is doing waterfall anymore. You know, agile kind of completely transformed, or the industry completely transformed to be, in some sense, agile. And whether you follow any of the methodologies that are so-called agile anymore, no one's doing that thing of like plan 3 years of work and then have it all written down and designed and then just implement it.
Well, one thing too that I think a lot of people conflate is they think of agile, they think no planning at all, just execute. But I think even with agile, there is still some planning or breaking up the work into phases or into chunks. So there is still some planning involved. And like, you don't just go in without any idea of what you're doing. Although I think some people, when they try to do agile, that's what they do. They just start typing immediately and whatever comes out, comes out. And that is doomed to failure in my experience.
Are you just too young to remember the time before agile, Amalith?
Absolutely. I don't think I have ever not done agile.
So to you, it's just development.
Yeah. The place I work with now, we do a very informal form of agile that has elements of Scrum. We have a monthly meeting. We talk about how things have been going, whether our processes are working, need improvements anywhere, figure out task lists, go through tasks, mark stuff as finished, and then repeat the next month. And it's a very iterative and highly collaborative process.
So define Scrum to me then.
From what I remember of the software development class I had, where we, a month was dedicated to Agile and Scrum. Scrum is process. Lots and lots of process. Stand-ups every week. Go around in a circle. Everyone talks about how the week went.
Every day.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right. Maybe I don't remember it as well as I thought I did.
Well, I'm ashamed to admit that I am a certified Scrum Master, which I imagine these days you would call a Scrum Facilitator. So I think you're right, Amalith. The kind of official definition of Scrum is all about just loads of process that you do, right? So you have a so-called sprint, which is like a 2-week or 1 week or 4-week period of time, and you plan stuff at the beginning of that. And you talk about how it all went at the end of that, and you decide exactly what work you're going to try and do within that time period. And then you have daily stand-ups where you talk about how it's all going. But the reasoning behind all of that is actually the reasoning behind all of Agile, which I think we've been kind of floating around, which is feedback loops. So the whole point of doing only a 2-week iteration instead of, say, a 3-year plan is so that you can get working software out and then get feedback from the people who are using it or paying for it or whatever to find out whether it's actually doing what's needed. So then you can adapt the plan.
Working in scare quotes, I would say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, more working than if you get 2 weeks into your 3-year plan, everything is broken and on the floor. No one has even begun to think about whether the code compiles, let alone whether you've got end-to-end testing or whether people can try it out and see if it works. So at its core, I think Agile has a really excellent idea of getting that short feedback loop. And the whole point of, say, daily stand-ups is you get even shorter feedback loops where you can talk about how it's going day to day and get help from other people and stuff like that. And all of that I think is really good, and then like if you do it properly, you do all the software development practices. So you do test-driven development, and then you're getting minute-by-minute feedback on whether your code's working, and you're writing test cases for the stories, as in the stuff that your software is supposed to do, and that gives you feedback over the kind of couple of days period. So you got all these feedback loops, and it's easier to stay on track and not just burn like 6 months doing something stupid.
I think also a lot of times Agile gets conflated with some of the process that you're describing. Like I've heard a lot of people say like, I'm not a fan of Agile. I hate the daily stand-ups. I hate all this, all the ceremony that goes along with it, all of the, weekly syncs and things. But I think that's a rejection of that process there, not of the sort of Agile methodology itself, because I've seen daily stand-ups done really quickly, really fast, where there is not really a lot of ceremony. It's just hey, this is what we're doing real quick, and then move on and go do it. I think a lot of times I have seen companies that will use those ceremonies or those processes as a way to almost procrastinate. As in, like, it's very easy to enumerate and list out all of the things that we need to do, all of the meetings and all of the taskings, and you can spend forever doing that. So it's easy to lean on that as the thing we know to do, because it's just one step after the other. It's harder to go off and build the thing.
Isn't that what you're trying to get away from with Agile, though? That you're spending all this time planning in the old waterfall method, whereas if you do too much of the bureaucracy effectively, then what's the point of being Agile in the first place?
So I think it's a different type. The ones that I've seen where the daily stand-ups have gone awry is when people start talking about not only all the taskings they're about to do or start doing, they almost start thinking about the problem and trying to go through the problem, as well as enumerating all of the things that they've already done. That's what it extends the ceremony in the process. Whereas what they're trying to get away from with waterfall is let's go through a detailed design of the actual system, code, whatever it is, all up front without ever actually having written the code. Because one of the problems being when you actually get to writing the code, you'll find out that half of your designs were wrong, or there was something you didn't realize, or somebody else needs a different component like that in the time frame.
Yeah, much better to find out in 2 weeks that you were completely wrong.
Yeah.
So, Amberlith, I wanted to ask, how much planning do you do in that process?
Earlier, when I started describing it, I was accidentally conflating a few different things. The monthly meetings we do are co-op wide. So those are probably not exactly agile. Those are more just a monthly meeting.
Right.
What we do weekly with a client is more of an actual meeting where we do plan these things out. And in that situation, we demo the features we completed last week to the product owner. He makes any corrections. If there's something we didn't do quite right, then there's a new ticket. And we try and capture everything they say, everything they would like about that feature in the ticket. And then once we finish going through everything, all the tasks we completed last week, that's when we start discussing things that are new. And we explicitly do not cover any technical details during that meeting. It's explicitly, exclusively high-level stuff. It's later on in private where we start discussing more implementation details.
That's interesting, because I think I have a slightly different perspective from some of my colleagues, because I generally think we don't spend enough time talking about what we're going to do before we do it. In almost every team I've been in, that's been my feeling. So one of the things that I use, the Scrum process, we use a slightly very light Scrum-like process. The things I use that for is to get people together and make sure we've actually talked it through. So even though sometimes it's only going to be one person implementing it, I really want everyone on the team to have input into how it's done, like right down to like how the code's going to work as much as we can. Because you end up with better code and you end up thinking of stuff that otherwise you're going to go off and waste your time on. So I kind of use that stuff to try and get us talking more, which in a way you could say is like spending more time planning, right? But that I think that's good for us.
I think it would be good if we did more communication about implementation specifics, because we have run into situations where we spend a week implementing something, and then when it comes time for code review or demo, we've done it really wrong
Right.
in some way. And it could have been caught much earlier in the process had we been pairing, maybe, or something along those lines, when there was more communication between team members.
That can also be a symptom of when people go off and write code in a silo or in a vacuum. And that can happen singleton or in pairs or even in small groups. But whenever you have a group of people going off and building code kind of alone and then coming back to the group later on, if that delta of time between them going to do something and coming back and showing their work is longer than like a day or two, you have a lot of opportunity for there to be a mismatch in like what you thought they were going to come back with versus what they actually came back with. And if there are other teams or people operating in parallel on other components, it's happens all the time where there's a miscommunication or something where the team comes back with something that is totally different and then might invalidate something that another team or another person was working on. And it's a super frustrating way to work. So those early check-ins are crucial.
That's what daily stand-ups are supposed to be about, in my opinion. Daily stand-ups is like one of the things that either Scrum or other agile techniques advocate, which is basically like up to 15 minutes, preferably 5, where you get together and you talk about what you're doing. And the problem is it very easily can become justifying my existence or just very boringly repeating what you've been doing. But if it's done right, it's like, oh, I figured out I'm going to solve this way. Only a minute of talking, just enough to spark in someone else's mind, oh, hang on, I don't think that's going to work, or, oh, that's going to fit in with the thing I'm doing. And then suddenly you have that kind of interaction. It's like a forced moment where you might have that conversation if you bumped into each other, but this way it's just a chance for that to happen.
One thing we found that helps during some of those is if there's 2 people working on a project or on a team together, having both of them state the problem as they understand it can so often show that even though they were saying the same words, they were thinking totally separate things. And it's kind of interesting how often that happens and just the messiness of human language.
Yeah, and actually another good way of getting that kind of conversation to happen when you're planning stuff, even though people hate it, is estimating. Everyone hates estimating because it's basically impossible and it feels pointless. It feels like a waste of time. But actually, if 2 people say, oh, that's a small or that's a large, then you start having a conversation about why. And that's when you really start to learn people are understanding it totally differently.
Yeah, I really love that. We called it like the t-shirt design of small, medium, large. That is an excellent way to estimate effort-ish or complexity. I think it's a great thing to do. We've also tried things like points, but that seems to be a little bit more subjective and people start to argue over nuance.
Yeah, I've used story points in the past. Story points, by the way, are like an arbitrary unit of the complexity of a task. So the idea is that it doesn't equate to a number of days or weeks or whatever. It's just how complex is this relative to some other task that we know is worth, say, 3 points or something like that. And the idea is that it takes your mind away from what humans are really bad at, which is, oh, I'll probably have that done in 2 weeks. It can't be that hard. And instead goes, okay, well, it's about as hard as this other thing. And then someone else can then go off and do the work and say, well, that other thing took us 6 weeks. So maybe this thing will also take us 6 weeks, and you end up with better predictions of your progress.
That and updating your estimates is key. Like sometimes I've found people are hesitant to update their estimates of, oh, actually it's becoming harder than I thought it was, right. Or I'm done fast. Here you go. And updating those estimates daily can really help a team gel together.
This whole conversation is highly on topic for me because I recently became the Scrum facilitator for our team. And our team had been quite chaotic before and we were trying to be more organized. And so we did a load of planning and estimating, discovered that the thing we were going to do was going to take way longer than we thought. So we found out about that nice and early. So I kind of feel like I slightly won that battle. And then I tried to get us to do daily stand-ups and the team sort of rebelled and said, oh, we're wasting our time with this. So we've reduced the number of stand-ups we're doing now, which is making me sad.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxdevtime.com/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux After Dark for silly challenges and philosophical debates, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too. at linuxdevtime.com/support. So from listening to you lot talk about Agile, it seems that the kind of outsider's perspective that Agile amounts to not having a plan and just basically YOLOing it is not really fair. And it's much more a case of there is a plan, but you're being agile about that plan and changing it as and when needed, which may even be daily.
Absolutely. I mean, generally, if you're doing something like Scrum, where you've got this 1 week or 2 week iteration time, the idea would be you don't change the overall plan during the 2 weeks, and then you can change it when you start the next 2 week iteration. So you can say, oh, actually, this thing we were planning to do next week, we should put off because something more important has come along or we've learned something new. So you definitely should have like a direction of travel. You definitely need that project owner person who is really helpful, who's setting that direction and giving feedback on, like, have we done the right stuff in the last couple of weeks? Or is it what I was actually expecting? Did we understand things the same way? But I think there are a couple of things that can go really wrong with Agile. One is that people do just YOLO it and use it as an excuse not to have any clue or not to bother communicating their plan. They probably have got a plan in their head, but it's just a way of developers like going, oh, I'm just doing whatever I like. You can't disturb me because it's Agile. And the other thing is that I have actually seen in one team, which fortunately I wasn't on, it was a sister team of mine, where Scrum was used as an absolute stick to beat people. So you agree up front 2 weeks before what you're planning to do in those 2 weeks. And then management were using that as, you haven't done your thing, you need to work weekends, you need to work late to hit that target, which is kind of the opposite of the idea of Agile, where you respond to what's happened and you find out, new information, so you change your plan. This was like, we can beat more work out of you by keeping you to 2 week deadlines.
Well, on the first point, it sounds like some people will conflate Agile with move fast and break things.
Yeah.
And they're just not the same.
We should never move fast or break things.
Yeah. Move slowly and fix things.
Yes.
But what a shocker that management found a way to exploit Agile to get more out of their staff.
Yeah, it didn't work, of course. It was a disaster. The code was awful. People writing code late at night after weeks of being absolutely exhausted. Write terrible code. But yeah, it was their attempt to do that, yeah.
Is that why all games are so rubbish when they come out?
Yes, definitively, yes.
I saw an article in the Register that said study finds 268% higher failure rates for agile software projects.
Yeah, so I think, at least in this article, at least the first part of it, one of the things that they seem to conflate is what we said at the beginning. Agile is just YOLOing it, no plan at all, run off. And what they said was that a development company likes to have some kind of plan to succeed, which absolutely. When you plan out some of your work, you're going to be more successful. So I think this article in particular was conflating the popular version of Agile versus what was truly intended by it.
I think it's really important to talk about the role of this person called the project owner. And I've heard it said in some of the Agile training that I've done that it's the most important and the most difficult job. And it's kind of like a product manager, but a bit more dynamic. It can actually be a customer. But the point of that person is to keep their eye like really firmly on the direction of travel, like what is the product and where are we going with it and why? And if you have that direction, then you change plans all the time because you've learned stuff, but you're going in this really solid, consistent direction. But if you don't have it, then you can wander all over the place. And that could be one of the reasons why a lot of these projects fail.
I think we also have to define failure here. I believe the article was talking about failure just being not delivered on time. But that's also just a product of, one, software is hard and estimating is really hard and humans are really, really bad at estimating. So I'm pretty sure that companies not using Agile would have had just as high, if not higher, failure rates to deliver whatever the said thing was at estimated time.
Probably not so good at noticing they've failed. That's the other thing, of course. Scrum in particular is really good at helping you notice that stuff is not working well, which can make it quite unpopular. So there's one project I was on years ago where we were constantly late and we had these very long, it wasn't exactly waterfall, but we had like 3-year release cycle. It was supposed to be 18 months and it really took 3 years. And we started doing quite strict Scrum and we started really planning things ahead, thinking through how long things were going to take. And we started giving accurate estimates. It was a very complex code base. It was very difficult to work with. We started giving estimates that we were confident were correct. And then the project got cancelled because it wasn't working. And we found that out through the Scrum process.
Is that because some of your estimations were for more near term that you were finding out that you weren't hitting those particular goals? Or was it still based off of those like 18-month turned into 3-year style goals?
No, at that point, we were estimating over shorter timescales. But the main thing was, prior to that, we had been estimating wrong and then taking 3 years when it should have taken 18 months. But no one cancelled the project because they always thought, oh, well, it's going to be done in 18 months, right? But once they have the information, they make the decisions. I mean, I kept my job in that situation, so maybe it was okay.
Yeah, I think it can all be boiled down to tightening those feedback loops.
Yeah.
Being able to change your plan. All of those things are critical in software development.
But nothing beats getting the customer, like what Amal is describing, where the actual person who is the end user, consumer of this thing is having a look at it every week and helping you, guiding you. That's so brilliant.
Yes. He points us in the direction. We do our best to follow. Sometimes the direction is not clearly described and we go in the wrong way. But in those situations, it's not entirely our fault.
And it doesn't take long to find out, right?
1 week. Yeah. Sometimes less if we talk with that product owner and say, hey, this is how we're thinking about implementing this thing. What do you think? And then he says, that's not right. And then we know even before the next week that we should go in a slightly different direction.
Yeah, and it's hard to even describe to someone as young as you, Amalith, what it's like to spend 3 years working on an 18-month project and then find out you didn't build the right thing. But that is honestly what it was like.
That just sounds horrific.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, you spend 3 years on it, put it in front of the customer, and then they just press all the wrong buttons.
Yeah, and it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, we'd better wrap it up, but do let us know what you think about Agile. You can email us show@linuxdevtime.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amalith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been Andy.
See you later.